Before you fall asleep tonight, before your brain finishes processing whatever today left behind, I want to tell you something about the oldest thing humans have ever done together. Something older than farming, older than language as we know it, older than the wheel, the city, the written word, the first law, the first god with a name, the moment someone died, and the people who loved them had to figure out what to do next. We tend to think of death rituals as religious, as cultural, as something invented by civilization and passed down through institutions. But the evidence tells a different story, a much older one. In 1908, in a cave in southwestern France called La Chapelle aux Saints, archaeologists uncovered the skeleton of a Neanderthal man. He had lived approximately 75,000 years ago. He had arthritis so severe in his spine and hips that he could barely walk. His teeth were almost entirely gone. He had multiple healed fractures throughout his body, and yet he had survived for years. In conditions that would have made basic survival nearly impossible without help, someone fed him. Someone carried things for him. Someone chose, repeatedly, to keep him alive when it would have been easier not to. And when he finally died, they put him in the ground, in a hole that appears to have been deliberately dug, surrounded by animal bones and what some researchers believe were flowers. This was not Homo sapiens. This was not us. This was a different species, a cousin, a branch of the human family that went extinct 30,000 years ago, and they buried their dead. The debate among archaeologists about what this means has never fully settled. Some argue the flowers were placed there intentionally, that the Neanderthals were performing something we would recognize as a funeral. Others argue the animal bones and pollen entered the grave by accident, carried in by burrowing rodents and wind. What is not disputed is the grave itself, the deliberate placement of the body, the positioning, the care. Something about that moment, the moment after death, demanded a response that was more than practical. Even then. Even before everything we think of as civilization existed. Let's go back further. 300,000 years ago, in a cave system in South Africa called the Rising Star Cave, a team of researchers led by paleoanthropologist Lee Berger made a discovery that changed what we thought we knew about human behavior. Deep inside the cave, in a chamber accessible only through a narrow shaft barely wide enough for an adult to squeeze through, they found bones. Hundreds of them. All belonging to the same species, Homo naledi, a small-brained hominin that we had never identified before. No predator drag marks, no flood deposits, no evidence that the bodies had been brought there by any natural process. The bones were placed there by other members of the same species 300,000 years ago. Before Homo sapiens existed, before what we normally call human consciousness, something that was not quite us decided that the dead deserved to go somewhere specific. Somewhere that required effort. Somewhere that required squeezing through a shaft in the dark and carefully laying bodies in a chamber that no living thing would ever use for anything else. We do not know what they felt. We cannot know. But we know what they did, and what they did looks from the outside like grief. It looks like the need to mark the ending of a life with something more than simply walking away. Move forward now to roughly 100,000 years ago, the caves of Kafse and Skul in what is now Israel. Here, early Homo sapiens were burying their dead with deliberate grave goods. Red ochre, the pigment used to color skin and tools, deer antlers placed beside the body of a child, seashells from the coast, carried inland, placed with the dead. These were not accidental inclusions. These were chosen objects, things that meant something to the living, given to the dead, for reasons we cannot fully reconstruct, but that feel, even across 100,000 years, completely familiar. Egypt is where the conversation about death became the loudest. The ancient Egyptians did not treat death as an ending. They treated it as a transition, a doorway from one form of existence into another. The preparations they made for the dead were not gestures of farewell. They were practical arrangements for a continued life. The body was preserved because the spirit would need it again. The tomb was stocked because the dead would need to eat. The spells in the Book of the Dead were not prayers, they were instructions, a roadmap for navigating what came next. What strikes modern researchers is not how foreign this thinking seems. It is how familiar the emotion underneath it feels. The terror of the person disappearing entirely, the need to do something, anything, to send them forward with what they might need, the refusal to simply let them go. In ancient Mesopotamia, the world that produced our earliest written records, grief was documented with an honesty that reads across 4,000 years without losing anything. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest surviving piece of literature we have, is not really a story about heroism. It is a story about a man who watched his best friend die and could not accept it. Gilgamesh tears his hair. He refuses to allow the body to be buried for 7 days because he cannot stop looking at the face of his friend and waiting for him to wake up. He eventually sets out across the known world in search of immortality. Not for himself. To bring his friend back. He does not find it. He returns home. And he builds walls around his city. Not because he conquered his grief, because he found a way to live alongside it. The scholars who study this text note that it is the oldest known written exploration of what we would now call complicated grief. The kind that does not resolve, the kind that rewrites the person you are. Written down 4,000 years ago, describing feelings you have probably had. The Greeks approached death as a problem to be solved philosophically, and failed magnificently. Socrates drank poison and spent his last hours calmly explaining to his weeping students why death was probably fine. His students wept anyway. The Romans built elaborate funeral processions with actors wearing masks of the dead person's ancestors so that the deceased appeared to be accompanied by everyone who had gone before them. The Vikings believed the worthy dead were carried by warrior women to a hall where they would feast and fight until the end of the world. The Egyptians believed you could be judged by the weight of your own heart against a feather. The ancient Chinese performed elaborate ancestor ceremonies because the dead were understood to remain active participants in the lives of the living, requiring food and respect, an ongoing relationship. Every civilization that has ever existed invented an answer to the same question. Where did they go? And every answer is different, and every answer is trying to do the same thing. Make the unbearable bearable. Keep the person near just a little longer. Make the ending mean something. Here's the thing that tends to stop people when they first encounter it. Grief is not uniquely human. Elephants return to the bones of their dead. They touch the bones gently with their trunks. They stand over them. They return year after year to the same site. Chimpanzees have been documented carrying the bodies of their dead infants for days, sometimes weeks, unable to put them down. Dolphins have been observed supporting the bodies of dead calves on the surface of the water, refusing to let them sink. Crows gather around their dead in what researchers have begun calling crow funerals, not out of sentimentality, but apparently to learn about the danger that killed the individual. The response to death is ancient, pre-human. Built into social animals at a level that precedes language and culture and consciousness as we understand it. What humans added was the story. The explanation, the ritual, the symbol, the grave good, the feather, the hall of the ancestors, the book of the dead. We took the raw, overwhelming fact of loss, and we built architecture around it. Not because the architecture made it hurt less, but because standing inside something you built together hurts differently than standing in an open field. So let's go back to that cave in France. The Neanderthal man who could barely walk, who was kept alive by people who chose to keep him alive, who was put in the ground by people who chose to put him there. We do not know if they cried. We do not know if they said anything over him. We do not know what they believed about where he went, but we know they did not simply leave him. They stopped. They gathered. They marked the ending of his life with effort and with care. And if you have ever stood at a graveside and not known what to say, if you have ever sat in the room after and not been able to leave yet, if you have ever kept an object that belonged to someone who is gone for no practical reason, simply because getting rid of it felt like losing them again, you are doing the same thing, across 75,000 years, the same thing.